we're doing another one of these. We're going to do this one in less than 20 minutes because that's apparently the limit for YouTube. So here we go. I am going to switch to the PowerPoint. There it is. This should not count against my time, but it does. Aw, isn't it beautiful? I walked in a place like that recently. It was wonderful. Aperitif. Have you ever made any decisions as an adolescent that you now regret? Reading these is like really my main source of entertainment right now. And not only entertainment, like not like I'm laughing at you, but mostly it's one of the bright spots of my day. So I figured I'd ask you something like a little bit more personal because I love reading about them. But you can always tell me something silly if you don't feel like sharing. Anyway, there's your aperitif. I don't need to read it to you. You can pause and read it and write, right? You guys know how to do that. Great. So here's our agenda. Checking in. So just so that you're keeping track of what you should have done so far, 2 aperitif and reflection assignments, and the midterm. This week we're going to have 2 videos. Even though I said I was going to do once a week, I lied. This week I'm going to do 2, and we're going to come to why in just a minute. So you're going to have 2 more aperitif and reflection assignments, and I haven't been putting due dates on these on purpose. So basically just get them done, don't forget, and it's going to be okay. But you will have 2 aperitifs and reflection assignments this week because you'll have 2 videos. And here's why. Just kidding. Slides out of order. So next week, what's going to happen is that on Monday, we're going to have an interview with Matt Robinson, and he's the assistant principal at Troy High. And what he's going to talk about is basically the problem of when you're the assistant principal and a pandemic happens. So we'll see what kind of action plan you can write for him in terms of how to help adolescents in this situation. And then we're going to end on Wednesday at 6 p.m. with Bruce. He's my friend. He's a social worker at Troy High. I used to work at Troy High, hence all of these connections. And he's going to talk to us about a student that a teacher told him he was worried that the student was thinking about committing suicide. So that's a pretty serious one. And also, he and I have both known this student for probably 6 or 7 years. So there's lots of information to talk about in terms of that situation, and therefore lots to write about. So that's what's going to happen in the future. I'll put up discussion question places so you can post your questions about that with what information I just gave written down. So let's talk about the points possible. We have this poster session on our syllabus, which really I just am not into trying to like force that into a Zoom environment. It's really not what I envisioned. I like it to be a social thing. I like it to be like in person, and I don't want to look at a bunch of presentations, so we're just not going to do that. But I did come up with this, and I want your input about how you feel about this. So originally we had 150 points, but I've redesigned the points this way, so it's 143, which is pretty darn close and won't move anyone from a category of getting an A to a B, which can happen when you reduce points. So this is part of why we have an extra aperitif this week. That'll give you 2 more points, right? We originally said maybe we would just throw 1 action plan away because we only had 40 points built into the syllabus. But if we do both action plans, we'll have 50 points. So basically what we're trying to do is make up for the 25 points we've eliminated by eliminating the poster session and still give people opportunities to make the points up elsewhere. The course reflective essay we haven't really talked about, but it is all like a personal opinion kind of thing, and many of you have done that for my other class, and you know it won't be a big deal, and it's actually a pleasure for me to read, so I'm not taking that off. And the final exam. So this is my proposal for what we do. Instead of having a poster session, we just have a final exam. We lose 7 points, but we have made up for the other chunk of the points elsewhere. I hope that makes sense for everyone. So in terms of thinking about the final exam, I really can't just ignore the fact that we're living in this time where things are like absolutely crazy and that there are so few people like around us who have ever had this kind of experience. And so I don't really want to ignore it. And I think that if we can use it to, as like, use our final exam as a moment that we can kind of like document for this for ourselves, I would really enjoy that. So this is kind of what I came up with. Either you could like think about yourself, or you could think about another person around you if you don't really want to talk about yourself that much, and talk about how this situation has impacted development. Of course, we'll stick with the same 4 categories that we always look at for the action plans. And I thought that we could have the option to include like photographs that you take that kind of go along with what you're saying, because again, I want this to seem like it's something that you're documenting. It's something that in 20 years you can look at and you can share with your kids and you can go like, this was absolutely bonkers. And it will be hard for you to remember. So keeping the evidence in writing and with photo evidence or like screenshots of what the media is saying, I think will help you remember better. I thought you could have the option to share with your classmates. So, depending on what you write about and how personal it is, I think the sharing with the classmates kind of adds to the documentation part of this whole thing, and we could discuss how to do that. And maybe you just want to make a video instead, or like a screencast, exactly what I'm doing, like a narrated PowerPoint. And I can show you this. The program that I use to do this is completely free. So you could do something like that instead of writing a paper. Mostly what I'm interested in is that you're demonstrating that you're thinking about what's happening right now in a reflective way, and also incorporating the perspectives that we have discussed in class into your reflection. That's my bottom line there. So we'll come back to this later, but think about how you feel about that. So how about some content? We're going to revisit Piaget and Vygotsky because those are our, head dudes in terms of cognitive development. We're going to talk just briefly about intelligence and psychometrics, and we're going to talk a little bit about decision making, but mostly, yeah. Okay, so here we go. How are we doing on time? I think we're okay. This thing doesn't really tell me how much time I've used, so. Anyway, this is Piaget's final stage. And if you ask me, the final stage of cognitive development, in order to rest that in the lap of teenagers, seems a little absurd. It seems like I hope that we develop cognitively like far beyond the year of 18 years of age. And I think that probably there's a lot of evidence that we do. So even though this is the final stage, I think you should consider it not that this is a thing that is achieved by adolescence, but more so it's a thing that adolescents begin to explore. So they move out of the concrete phase, the concrete operational stage, that was the one before this, where like everything is in black and white, and now they're really able to think about things hypothetically, theoretically, and in terms of, things are not exactly right and wrong. There's no black and white. They can kind of understand that right and wrong has context, And what happens with kids in this stage is that because they're just brand new to these new cognitive abilities. Oh, yeah, right. So actually, a lot of people say that probably that people this age don't even get to this part, that they don't get it to it until later. But you remember Piaget grew up in like kind of a privileged place with, lots of room for exploring and independence. So maybe Piaget and his children, because of that kind of freedom and privilege, were able to get to these points sooner than other people who have to divide their time, to learning other things and not just like about how their brains work. So anyway, when you get to this stage, this is more Piaget, just so you know, it's almost like you have given adolescents this cognitive tool and they just don't know how to use it quite yet. It's like they have a chainsaw and they know they can cut a tree down, but they're kind of like swinging it over their heads and doing dangerous stuff with it, and they haven't quite mastered the art of handling it intelligently. And so they go off the deep end a little bit about the theoretical ideas about things. And I put this up here mostly because I think that if you look at the research here, the oldest article is from 1958. So as old as like 70 years ago, people were describing adolescence in this way. And they continue to prove these kinds of things all the way up until the most recent one is 2009, right? But I think what happens to people is that they often imagine that their generation is somehow like stronger or better than the next coming generation. And they say this like kids these days kinds of things. And those ideas listed on the side there, those are things that we love to point at adolescents and teenagers and say that they're so annoying for doing these things and that like our generation didn't do that. But we're all wrong. Teenagers have been acting like teenagers in very similar ways for a really long time. So try not to grow up and be one of those judgy adults who says like, oh my God, teenagers nowadays, they're so annoying. They're so self-centered. They just like totally are disconnected from reality. It's like, yeah, bro, but like all teenagers have been that way for 70 years, at least as long as we've been documenting it, they've been acting that way. So probably you acted that way. I know I definitely acted that way. Like this idea, the imaginary audience, people are always staring at you. Heck yeah. I definitely thought that like when I walked into a room that like everybody was making a note about how I look, and really they probably weren't. They were just like, oh, what's that noise, you know? Me and everyone else. And so will all the teenagers in the future. So try not to be that cranky old person who forgets that all teenagers have been like this forever. And it's kind of like not their fault, I guess. I mean, it's universal anyway, kinda, at least in Western societies. So anyway, the opposite end of Piaget was Vygotsky. Remember, Vygotsky was a social learning guy, and he grew up in a communist country where people did everything together, right? So he has this totally different idea about teenage thinking, and he doesn't think that they're doing theoretical thought. He thinks actually the opposite. And in this little blurb that's taken from the textbook, basically what he's saying here is that teenagers, if you make school more about what they actually do in their own lives, that they'll totally get it better than if you make it abstract and theoretical, right? Wow, this is so weird. Check it out. This is what part of my dissertation is on. So part of my dissertation, which you guys might be tired of hearing about it, but too bad because I spend like 4 hours a day writing it, so guess what, it's on my mind, is that like part of what would make a school better is if the content wasn't so theoretical and the content wasn't so abstract, if instead that teachers made content that focused on that connected to students' lives. Because in part, as we saw on this last slide, like teenagers are really into themselves, right? On top of that, research is showing that the kind of skills you learn, the same kind of cognitive skills outside of the classroom, but once you bring them into like an abstract way of thinking about them, it can be difficult to do. So this little bit over here, this is the paper that my dissertation is based on proving. Like I'm trying to go into a classroom and prove that everything that in this paper is correct. This is a link to the paper if you want to get nerdy about it. I love this paper and it changed my whole life. So it's basically saying the same thing that Vygotsky says, except that it talks about why this happens in terms of evolution. So it talks about how we are adapted to focus more on things that are immediately relevant to us because this is a way that increases survival rates. So I just thought that was kind of cool that those two things connect. and I guess I just see my dissertation everywhere. Right, that's because I do a good job at it, and I am drowning in it. So intelligence, we really did cover a lot of what it talks about in this chapter in terms of intelligence. They talked about test biases, and they talked about different ways to measure intelligence, and we really did cover a lot of that already. Remember, we talked about how you can't give IQ tests to Black and African American kids in California, and how the SATs predict incorrectly for different groups of people, right? But intelligence tests are not going to go away. They're just a thing that we're fascinated by, a thing we like to talk about a lot. And so we can say we hate them, but we still have to learn about it. And if you're interested in having this conversation, look at that! I'm teaching a class about this, assessment and measurement, in the fall. It looks like I still have 23 seats open. I would love to have you all in this class, and I promise you it'll be interesting. The first time I took the assessment and measurement class at the graduate level, I was like, oh my God, I hate tests. Obviously, I don't give tests, right? So I'm not into it. But this is not about giving tests. It's about the art of like trying to measure a thing that is unmeasurable. And it's a very cool concept. I promise it is cool. Just shut up and take my class. So there it is. Okay, moving along. I feel like I'm talking way too fast, but we do have to cover this in a very little bit of time. Plus, I'm going to do another video later, so it's okay. So the textbook also talked a lot about decision making, which we touched on in the last lecture, which is like decision making happens a lot with frontal lobe cooperation. And the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex, is still developing in teenagers. So there's a lot of reasons why they make crappy decisions. And this is a thing that's been documented forever. So another thing that's kind of coming to, another thing that's coming to people's attention now is the student loan crisis. And when they're talking about the student loan crisis, they are literally talking about people like me. Because back in the day, there were groups like Sallie Mae and Navient, this is a Navient private loan here, who would knowingly let teenagers make decisions that impacted their future, even though it is well documented that teenagers are not good at that. So let's look at this. This over here, this little screenshot, that's literally a screenshot that I just took. That's from one of my maybe 9 Sallie Mae loans, because I went to private school for the first 2 years. I went to St. John's, right? That is a very expensive school. So here we go. Right there, that's how much I owe on the loan right now. $7,591. This is one of 9 loans, right? That money was given to me in the year 2000 when I was 18 years old. I just graduated. This is my second semester. No, so yeah, I was 18 years old, just turned 18. It was my second semester. I was a freshman in college, right? And it was actually $5,000. So let's follow this math here. In the year 2000, when I was 18 years old, Sallie Mae gave me not just $5,000, but $30,000 at the time to pay for my schooling. Now, how many years later? 20 years later, where I have been paying on these loans off and on, I still owe $7,500. Oh my God, what? Wait, how do I owe $2,500 more than the amount I took out when I've been paying on the loan off and on for 20 years? Holy cow. It's criminal. It's literally criminal. Oh, it's criminal. It's crazy that Sallie Mae would give people loans with insane interest rates. How on earth could 18-year-old me really understand what $30,000 was and really understand and make decisions for me. 18-year-old me made decisions for 38-year-old me. That's me currently. And the world let that happen. And I'm like a pretty it's on this side. I'm a pretty severe case of what went wrong with this student loan problem that is often being described in the news right now, especially because of what's happening with people's finances. But I'm not the only case. I know tons of people in this situation. And what's even worse about this is that right now, the government put a stop payment on a lot of people's loans. Those loans don't qualify. I have to pay those. It doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter that I'm a full-time student, because a lot of times when you're a full-time student, you don't have to pay on your student loans. Those loans, those private ones with those high interest rates, they don't care. They don't care that there's a pandemic. They don't care that I'm a PhD student. They don't care that I'm not allowed to have a full-time job. And they don't care that that decision was made by 18-year-old me for the me of 20 years later. Irrelevant. They just say, give us the money. We don't care. And that's one of 9 loans that I have from them that are from my first 2 years of college. So here's my soapbox. A lot of you are in your juniors and seniors, right? So this news may come too late for you in terms of your undergraduate education. But in terms of your graduate education, stay away from the private loans. Stay away from the Sallie Mae loans. Don't go near Nelnet. They don't care. They're awful. They'll give you all the money that you want because they just are banking on the fact that, like me, you will just go throughout life and never be able to pay for them. It's lovely. It's lovely. So, yeah, there it is. That shit sucks. I don't really know. I really don't know. It's criminal to think that a teenager can make those kinds of decisions. Nope, wrong button. Click this. Now I can do it. So that kind of gave me the aperitif, which was, what decision do you regret? I totally regret taking out all those loans. I don't regret going to St. John's, but I regret taking out all those loans because that's like the rest of my damn life. So for your reflection, tell me what you think about the final exam options. Tell me if you prefer some certain way of doing it. Tell me what you think about another option that I haven't thought of. And yeah, and then I'll weigh those. I thought I asked you that question, but apparently I didn't. So sorry about that. Anyway, I'm hoping I have not exceeded my 20-minute time limit, and I will talk to you all soon.